entirely? Okay, perfect. Welcome to our graduate students who are here with us right now. Some of our undergraduate students are also here with us today. Thank you all for being here. Let me probably disable the waiting room. Okay. Awesome. Okay, so it's now 8 p.m. our time and 11 a.m. in Professor Renzulli right now. So thank you all for being here. I am Myra Garces Baksal, the Assistant Dean for Research and Graduate Studies in the College of Education. Welcome, everyone. I know that it's going to be the national holiday long weekend soon, and I do appreciate your finding the time to be here this evening, well, mid-morning for Professor Renzulli for this keynote event, which is actually part of the Cross-Cultural Collaboration Symposium that is jointly organized with Penn State at Hazleton. First, I would like to thank and acknowledge the following. His Excellency Zaki Nusaybe, Chancellor of the United Arab Emirates University, who delivered his welcome remarks. Dr. Dave Callejo Perez, Associate Vice President and Senior Associate Dean for Academic Programs for Penn State University. Dr. Najwa Al-Hossani, the Dean of College of Education, United Arab Emirates University, and our keynote speaker, our other keynote speaker for this event, Dr. Elizabeth Wright, Acting Chancellor of Pennsylvania State University. I would also like to acknowledge the presence of the Chair of the Special Education Department, Professor Hala El-Hawaris, the Organizing Committee from Penn State Hazleton, Professor Karen Stylianides and Professor Garrett Huck, and the Organizing Committee from UAE University College of Education, Professor Georgios Stylianides, Chair of Physical Education, Professor Mohammed Al-Hossani, Chair of Foundations of Education Department, and Professor Mona Al-Janahi, an Assistant Professor with the Curriculum and Instruction Department. One of the undergraduate classes, part of this cross-cultural collaboration, is SPED 321, which is an introduction to gifted and talented education. And they have been working tirelessly with their partners in Penn State Hazleton to learn more about gifted education across their varied contexts. Hence, this keynote address is definitely something that both faculty and students are looking forward to. I would also like to acknowledge the presence of international guests coming from different parts of the world and esteemed guests from the UAE, Dr. Mona Al-Gamri, Enrichment Program Manager at ADEC, Abu Dhabi Department of Education and Knowledge, or the Education Department of the Ministry of Education, Dr. Mariam Ali Al-Gawi, Director of Hamdan bin Rashid Al Maktoum Center for Giftedness and Innovation, who are with us right now to hear Professor Renzulli deliver his keynote address and share his expertise in gifted and talented education. Professor Joseph Renzulli is a University of Connecticut Board of Trustees Distinguished Professor, a former director of the National Research Center on the Gifted and Talented in the University of Connecticut, and is recognized to be among the 25 most influential psychologists in the world by the American Psychological Association. He also received the Harold McGraw Jr. Award for Innovation in Education, which is considered to be the Nobel for educators. And he also served as a consultant to the White House Task Force on Education of the Gifted and Talented. As an academic working in the field of gifted education, I can definitely say that Professor Renzulli's impact on my own teaching, my research, personal and professional work have been profound. He has inspired me to put at the center of all of my life's work, both personal and professional, his 3 E's: enjoyment, engagement, and enthusiasm. His life's work on creativity, talent development, and giftedness is unparalleled, such that one of our PhD students who defended her dissertation proposal on creative giftedness yesterday, she calls this keynote event a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Indeed, it is my honor and my privilege to welcome Professor Joseph Renzulli.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that nice introduction. And I want to say that it is a great honor for me to be with you today. I have visited your beautiful country on a number of occasions, and I use this diagram with the building crane because every time I went to UAE, there were more buildings springing up out of the ground. So I also want to mention a question that is oftentimes asked of me, and that is, why should we spend time, money, teacher training, resources to develop the gifts and talents of our young people? And the answer to that question is a very easy one. The prosperity of a country is dependent upon the intellectual capital, the creative capital of the young people, our future inventors, designers, entrepreneurs, scientists. All of it comes from the kinds of things that we try to provide in gifted education programs. And my work is a little different from the work of other people because I try to develop these things in a larger percentage of the population than just the usual 2 or 3 or 5%, which has been a tradition in gifted education. I always begin with this slide, and all educators are aware that all learning exists on a continuum, and that continuum ranges from deductive, didactic, and prescriptive, mainly developing the memories of children, all the way over on the right to investigative, inductive, and inquiry-oriented. And that really is where the focus of my work has been. And again, the goal of this work is to produce inventors, designers, writers, people who will make a difference in the world. And by the way, I am making a copy of these slides available to you because I don't read all of my slides. I skip them, I mention them and move on because of time. So anyway, when you get this, you'll realize that this is something that all educators already know. They just don't think about a lot. So we move on, and my work also includes a combination of both enrichment and acceleration. There's arguments in the field of one versus the other when both are very important. So that's what this little diagram is intended to convey. Now, my work is built around a thing which is called the Schoolwide Enrichment Model. And there are 3 major service delivery components of that model, which we'll be talking about today. And the first one is comprehensive strength assessment. And by comprehensive, I mean we're going to look at more than just test scores. We look at many, many other things. You'll see examples as we move along. The second is a process for high achieving students that we call curriculum compacting. We'll be discussing that. And the third is the pedagogy that guides this model. It's called the enrichment triad model. And we'll be going through those 3 different types of enrichment. Now, these 3 service delivery components are brought to bear on 3 school structures: the regular curriculum, a thing that we call enrichment clusters, and then any other kinds of services that you might provide, clubs, any kind of special grouping. On the right-hand side of the model, we see several of the resources that my colleagues and I have developed over the years to make the implementation of the model easier. I believe that theories and models have no value unless there's a very practical means for implementing those theories and models. The 2 underlying theories we'll be talking about is the 3-ring conception of giftedness, which I developed in the 1970s, and the enrichment triad model, which was also developed around the same time. The major goals, enjoyment. You know from your own life's experience that anything you enjoy, you work harder at and do better. I'm a baker. I'm always experimenting with new kinds of breads that I'm trying to make. Enjoyment leads to engagement, which is very hard to define, but think about engagement as the first time you fell in love with someone or something. Your whole body chemistry changed. And the third one is enthusiasm for learning. If we get beyond just making children memorize material, learning is a very, very exciting process. Now, we believe that this is true for all students, for all teachers, and for also creating a very highly engaging and enthusiastic school culture. Oops, I'm not able to advance here. Okay. Now, our model differs from other people's approaches in just a couple of ways. And one of them is that we provide some general enrichment for all students. And type 1 and type 2 are our two forms of general enrichment. We also provide enrichment clusters for all students. And when a youngster turns onto a topic and really gets excited about it, then we follow up with what we call type 3 enrichment. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples of type 3 as we move along. And notice that you can also enter type 3 from the regular curriculum. You'll see an example of that, or the environment in general. In today's example, just a child watching television with his mother, and that led to resources provided by the teacher. That was a remarkable project that you'll be seeing as we move along. So we're going to start with A, comprehensive strength assessment. And this again is based on my work on the three-ring conception of giftedness. And basically what I reported in this work is that gifted behaviors are a result of the interaction of three clusters of human traits: above average ability in a particular topic or task, and I would add interest there is very important. The second is creativity, and the third is what I call task commitment. Think of that as a refined or focused form of motivation. And down at the bottom, you see that these things are brought to bear upon either the general curriculum or, in the case of type 3 enrichment, specific areas where youngsters have a strong interest: city planning, advertising, choreography, local history. And then we'll talk a little bit about type 3 in greater detail as we move along. The other thing is that in my work, I've emphasized that there are two types of giftedness. Both are important. The first one is lesson learning giftedness. We know who those children are. They go to school well, they score good on tests, they get good grades in their classroom. However, my focus has been on what I call creative productive giftedness. And this is reflected in that individuals tend to become a creative producer of knowledge rather than just a consumer of knowledge in a particular area. And so in the examples that you're going to see, you will see examples of what I call creative productive giftedness. So here again is the three-ring conception of giftedness. And I've broken this down into just some of the characteristics that relate to the three different areas. So for example, under creativity, we have fluency, flexibility, originality, openness to experience, etc. Again, I will not read all of these because you're going to have copies of them, but this will give you some general idea of where the three-ring conception of giftedness came from. Now, also in my work, I've talked about two kinds of assessment. The first we're well aware of. I call this the difference between assessment of learning versus assessment for learning. Almost any test that we give a child, whether it's a teacher-made test or a state or national standardized achievement test, we're basically examining what children already know. In assessment for learning, we're looking at the kinds of skills and characteristics that happen in the lower left-hand corner that will give us some direction in the kinds of things that we should do with a student, even if that student doesn't have the magic 130 IQ score to get into a gifted program, which has been a long tradition around the world. The three most important ones there are interests, preferred styles of learning, and preferred ways of expressing oneself. The other thing that other things that we have included: enjoyment. Again, I mentioned that's the first of the three E's. And then a series of executive functions, which are becoming more important all the time: how children can organize, plan, develop their self-regulation learning skills. So those are things that we look at through a series of instruments that we've developed over the years. And blessedly, we have digitized those instruments so that it's a lot easier to gather and analyze them from just young people answering a series of questions on their keyboard. We also have developed an identification system that consists of a series of steps. Yes, we do look at test scores. We also look at teacher nominations, what we call alternate pathways. Again, this is the assessment for learning that I just mentioned. Special nominations, a child who is just spotted by a teacher with a strong interest and willingness to work in a particular area. We also notify parents. A lot of times parents think that giftedness is just high IQ, high test scores, or what I refer to as lesson learning giftedness. And then finally, what we call action information. A child does something one day in his or her classroom, and it's very exciting, it's very creative, it's very original. And so we want to follow up on those things. And again, there are articles on all of this at my website at the University of Connecticut. If you just go to www.gifted.uconn.edu and then look for the folder that says Schoolwide Enrichment, and you'll find articles on all of this. And all articles that I've written are downloadable, reproducible, translatable at no cost. So our talent focus is, 50% of the kids that we focus on are the high lesson learners, but we also get another 50% through assessment for learning information. Now, the second service delivery component is a process that's especially designed for children who learn regular material at a faster rate and level of comprehension than other young people. And we call this process curriculum compacting. And this is one of the planning guides that we use. What is the area, a curricular area being covered? How can we document that a young child already knows or can learn that faster than other children? And then we try to change it by giving them some kind of individual or small group work that involves the creative and productive process. We also recommend that we have some advanced classes, especially in areas like math and science and reading. I'm not opposed to ability grouping, but I do believe that our general enrichment is for all students. So here we see the benefits of compacting. Many articles have been written on this. Many research studies have been conducted, and it shows that it eliminates boredom. It gets youngsters much more engaged in the kinds of things that they want to do rather than the kinds of things that are necessarily part of the assigned curriculum. And there are, again, many articles about this on our website. Now, the most important part of my work is the pedagogy based on the enrichment triad model. Type 1 enrichment, exposing kids to ideas, topics, books, authors, dates, events in which they might get so turned on that they want to follow up in a type 2 way. They're going to learn some of the skills for investigating those things, or in a type 3 way where they'll actually want to do one or more of their own projects. And you'll see that again in the examples that we're going to cover. Because of the internet, there's an endless amount of material that we can use for type 1 experiences. We have, for example, virtual field trips. I can take children to any part of the world just by finding a virtual field trip to the Himalayan mountains or to the museum, the Louvre Museum in Paris. And so we have much, much more now that we can do, again, because of technology. Now, I'm going to start with a few examples so that you'll understand this better. This is a little girl named Kylie, and Kylie her teacher was covering a unit of study on insects, And Kylie, because of her profile, we learned that Kylie loved with her family to play board games. And so because of this interest, her teacher worked with her and she actually developed a board game based on ladybugs. And so here we see again, this comes from the regular curriculum, and it's a type 1 experience. And so this is now the role of the teacher as what we call the guide on the side. The first thing that the teacher did was get Kylie a number of books on how to develop a board game. And she studied that. Think of that as a sort of the type 2 enrichment. She's learning the skills of board game development. She eventually developed a game called the Ladybug Game. Here you see the cover of it, and here you see a picture of it. And so this game was picked up by a commercial company, and it became a bestseller. By the time she was 15 years old, she had earned enough money to pay her way through college. Next one is also one that I like. This is a young boy, a 5th grader named Brooks, and he got interested in something because he was watching a television program with his mother, and there was a young person on the program that suffers from a disease called porogia. And one of the things that Sam said, the little boy's name is Sam, with porogia, was that he always wanted to ride on a roller coaster, but he couldn't do it because of, again, his disability. And so Brooks met with his teacher, and they started talking about ideas, and he came up with the idea of developing a virtual roller coaster. Here we see the type 1 watching television. This comes from a non-school experience, but the school was smart enough to follow up. So teacher's role as guide on the side, he got many different how-to books on developing roller coasters. And these are some of the websites that he went to. And he eventually developed, this is again, some more of the websites. He studied all about roller coasters. He then went on a roller coaster and sat in the front seat with a video camera and a sound mechanism. And he also got a chair that vibrates, one of those chairs that, and it vibrates. So he got one of those, and he put all of these things together. And he also entered this in the state science competition, where he won first place. So here you see Brooks with his model roller coaster, and then the form that he developed for the state science contest. I'm a great believer in contests and competitions because that motivates kids to do something very unusual. So this again is an example of 2 examples of type 3 enrichment projects. Brooks went one step even further. He started contacting roller coaster amusement parks and roller coaster companies to see if they would put this virtual roller coaster outside the gate of a regular roller coaster, so that people with disabilities or heart problems or something could ride on the roller coaster. So here we see again a couple of nice examples going from type 1, getting interested in it, type 2, learning how to investigate it, and then on to type 3, actually doing a project. So in this case, in type 3 enrichment, there is no standard curriculum. Rather, we build the curriculum around the student, the individual, or small groups. We provide them with problem finding and focusing strategies. We also provide them with the methodological assistance, the how to do it in a particular area. And then the teacher gives feedback, encouragement, suggests additional resources. That this is the teacher's role as the guide on the side. And then finally, and I think this is most important, and that is helping the student find an appropriate audience and outlet for their work. The creative person always wants to have an impact on an audience. And so audience is very important. From a local audience, you might present it just to other classmates, to a national audience, you might present it online. Now, we also have developed for this a thing called the management plan that guides the young person through these steps. This is just one example of a group of children in the US who got very interested in Victorian architecture. And so they did a lot of study on Victorian architecture, but what I wanted to show you is their management plan. This is the plan that they developed with their teacher, And here you see the general interest, then the problem focusing, and then you see their intended audiences. You see the products that they might produce, the resources that they would need to study this, and then what are the steps for getting started. And so these are the planning guides that are very important in developing a type 3 enrichment project. So here you see some examples of type 3 and of the 3 types of enrichment. Again, you will have copies of this, but these are all just examples of things that we can do in each of the 3 different areas. Note again, general enrichment for all students and the enrichment clusters for all students. When it comes to type 2 enrichment, we've developed this taxonomy of thinking skills, somewhat like Bloom's taxonomy. If you know that work, we've divided this into 6 areas. And in our curriculum library at my lab, we have all kinds of material. For example, there's material in interviewing and surveying. There's material on oral and written and verbal communication skills. And so what I recommend is that over time, schools using the model start to find and use and try out effective materials in the type 2 enrichment area. Now, 6 things that you can do based on the material, the 2 theories that I mentioned, 3-ring and triad. And I'm going to go through these 6 things just to give you some of the specific services that we do in the SEM. I must say that number 4, service number 4 is a difficult one. We do this very easily with specially trained teachers of the gifted, but because one of our target audiences is the regular curriculum, we try to also train general classroom teachers in some of these skills. It's not as easy as teachers of the gifted, who are very enthusiastic and excited people, but we want even regular classroom teachers to do some of these kinds of enrichment with all of their students. Now, the first thing is what we call creative strength assessment. And we try to develop a portfolio of each child's strengths. Now, printed ones are very common, but they're also quite hard to work with. And so what we've done is we've taken a hint from the places like Amazon. I get a letter almost every week or an email from Amazon. Notice there it says, "Hello, Joseph S. Renzulli." Now, how do they know what to send me? Very simple. They have my profile, what I bought before, what books I like to read. They don't send me a list of the billion books in the world. They send me a list of books on baking bread, for example, which is my hobby. And so what we've done over the years is we've developed this electronic system, and I'm going to go through that briefly, and then you'll see a short video about it. But after the student answers these questions, the computer analyzes it and tells us this is a young girl named Valerie. It tells us her 3 major interest areas, the 3 ways that she prefers learning, and the 3 ways that she likes to express herself. So I think the best way to understand this is to let Valerie tell her story.
Valerie Stickles, and I'm a 6th grade student. I am one of the people who tried out this Renzulli learning website, and it was a really great website. I got my profile back, and I am one who loves poetry, and I really love poetry, and on my profile it actually said that I loved poetry. And so whenever I went on to my critical thinking or books, it was going to be all about poetry. On some poetry websites, they actually let me submit my work to contests and everything, and I haven't heard back from them yet because it's supposed to take a few weeks, but I can't wait to hear back, and so I'll hear back from my own email address. And I got helpful hints on poetry also. I got there was a website where you could actually like go and type in your poetry, and then you could kind of have it revised, and they would tell you stuff. And so I did get to do a little bit of that too. So it was a lot of fun.
Again, I want to tell you a little bit. By the time Valerie graduated from high school, she had 15 poems that were published locally or nationally. And this is all as a result of the kinds of resources that she received from the Renzulli Learning Program. Now, the program, again, looks a little bit like this. We get a profile of her individual strengths, and then there are 50,000 resources, and the computer picks resources just for Valerie. The teacher can also use this. I'm going to give you two quick examples. The first one is a teacher that is studying a unit on the US Constitution. And here you're going to see 4 children. I'm going to put them all on. And the teacher sent these websites to all of the children because they're about the US Constitution. But down below were websites that each of these 4 children individually got because of their particular profile. So today we talk a lot about differentiation and personalized learning. So in this case, we're just letting the computer do the hard work for us. And if you're interested in this, just go to this website that you see at the bottom and you can get more information. And as I mentioned earlier, this can now be translated into any language in the world, which is really nice, thanks to artificial intelligence. So this second example is a teacher that's teaching a unit of study on Egypt. And so she put this information in about the grade level of her students, their ability levels, etc. And up came a series of resources related to ancient Egypt. And she saw this one that I've circled here, Fun with Mummies, and she looked at it and it looked very, very interesting and very hands-on. So she selected it for her students. And this is an example where students can design and preserve their own mummy virtually. So they're given a hook. They can take the brains out through the nose and put them in a jar. Then they get a scalpel and they can take the organs out. They're learning all of the Egyptian words as well. And I know you could learn about this reading it in a book, but isn't it so much more fun and engaging to be able to actually dissect and preserve your own mummy? And so that's one of the reasons I'm so excited about this program, because it just does so much for you. So theory into practice. Here we see the 2 theories that led to the Schoolwide Enrichment Model. And here again, we see just some of the kinds of things that are in the 3 different types of enrichment in Renzulli learning. Let the computer do the hard work for us. Now, the second thing that's very important in my work is what I call how-to books. And again, at my lab at the University of Connecticut, I have a collection of books. Here you see just a few of them: How to Debate, Student's Guide to Social Action, Student's Guide to Conducting Social Science Research, Paper Engineering, Plays for Young Puppeteers. And this is really the type 2 enrichment in that it teaches skills like you saw with Kylie and like you saw with Brooks, so that they can go on and do some original work. And there are just thousands of these books available. Just to give you a very small example, this is a book called Worms Eat Our Garbage. And this is all the different kinds of research studies that kids can do: their water preferences, their temperature requirements, the environmental influences on earthworms. And here again, in this same book, how does light affect earthworms? How does moisture affect earthworms? So these are all the kinds of things that kids can do when they have access to these how-to books. And I would suggest that every school librarian try to create a separate section of the library with just how-to books. Now, the second one is a difficult one, or the third one, excuse me, but a very important one. And it's modifying the role of the teachers. And here we see the teacher's usual role, which we call sage on the stage. You've heard this before. And here at the bottom, we see we're replacing the sage on the stage with what we call the guide on the side, that the teacher is telling children where to go and look for resources, giving them feedback, editing, how to make their work better, all of these kinds of things. And it's very important that the teacher doesn't forget about their role as an information giver, but they also have an important role, which we call the guide on the side. So here's just a few hints for the guide on the side. And the first one is teachers should never be talking more than a third of the time after children get to work on their type 3 projects. Be there to answer questions, but not to be talking all the time. That's the sage on the stage. Now, another important part of our model is a thing that we call enrichment clusters. And here you see the 3 guidelines. Children that share a common interest, they come together during specially designated time blocks, and their major goal is to produce a product, a performance, a publication, a contest. And this is really where all children have an opportunity to enter into the category which we call type 3 enrichment. I'll just give you one example of this. I have 100. This is a group of children in New London, Connecticut, that were in an enrichment cluster called Night of the Notables, in which all children were going to learn about a special person, hero that they selected. And this is a young boy named Kenyon, and he's portraying the role of the first African-American astronaut, whose name was Guillaume Bluford. And so he had to study everything about this astronaut. He had to dress up like the astronaut. And then that evening, we had parents and children come in, and they would give a little brief talk about their person of interest, and then they would go to their separate tables, and people would come around and answer questions. And here you see all of the people that these youngsters studied. Again, here's Guillaume Bluford. That's me with the young boy, Kenyon. And you see Michelle Obama, you see Nelson Mandela, you see Anne Frank, many famous people. And this was so successful that these children then went around to other schools in New London and did the same thing so that people could see what they were doing in their enrichment cluster. Start with 2 or 3 exciting type 1s. It could be a visiting speaker. It could be a virtual field trip. It's ways that we get youngsters interested in something. Now, the other thing, and this is a very important thing, help youngsters explore the ways they like to express themselves. One of the instruments that we developed is called My Way. And there you see it. It's built into Renzulli Learning. And we ask young people how they like to express themselves. And each of these categories can be broken down. For example, in written products, which is not on the screen right now, there's like 62 different genres in written products. And so I find that if I can find how a young person likes to express herself or himself, we can work backwards from there. Also, look for contests and competitions. I don't know why, but young people want to get in things like this. In our country, every state has a science competition. They have a writing competition. We have a national competition, which is called National History Day for children that are interested in history. Competitions are very motivating for children. Brainstorm at least 3 formats that the product can take. Now, the next one is promoting infusion in the regular classroom. And as I mentioned earlier, this has been very difficult, but we have developed some techniques for doing this. And I want to give you just one example. I was working with a group of teachers in the state of Florida, and I asked them what were the 2 things that they felt that they taught that were most memory oriented and that could also be that they could make more exciting. And the 2 things that they came up with were US capitals, states and capitals. All children in America memorize the names and capitals of the 50 states. They have that on their test. And the other thing was multiplication tables. And so I divided the teachers into groups, and we developed a thing called the Creative Idea Generator. And by the way, there's articles on this, and you can copy this if you would like. And I asked them, what are some things that they could do to make states and capitals more interesting and make multiplication tables more interesting? And so here, I'm going to put all of these on at once. They came up with, believe it or not, 22 ideas in 10 minutes. Develop a rap song for the state, create state political cartoons, have a debate on the best location of the capital. And over the years, this teacher kindly sent me some of the examples. One of the things that she did was do a big US map on the floor, and there were many questions about the states related to that map. Another thing was some of the children developed a matching test. So here we see they had to study something that was a unique factor. So here we see for the state of California, the children came up with, its economy is so large that if it were a country, it would rank as, it would be the 17th ranked country in the world. And these, imagine the research that children had to do in order to do this. Now, this next one, everybody asks me about. One of the kids discovered online that there was a company that made cookie cutters the shapes of different states. And so they ordered a copy of these cookie cutters, and then they developed a little baking company, and they went around to different classrooms. They had already made and cooked the dough, and then they had the children study where the capital of that state would be, and then they would then put a little chocolate dot where the capital was. And I really like this example. And everybody asks me where they can get this. So there's where you can buy it. I don't know if they make an international one. Wouldn't it be nice to have a cookie cutters of all the different countries? Take a look at that website, maybe you can find out. But this was what I would call an extension of the whole process. And for kids, this was a whole year-long process. And they went around from classroom to classroom, and they went to other schools, and they would give the kids the dough, and they would cut out the shapes, and they would place the chocolate dot on it. Now, the math one was a little bit different. I asked the children how much is 6 by 4, and everybody says 24. Then we added a question, how many different ways can you make 24? And here are some of the results that came from the classrooms in Florida. Some are very simple, 23 plus 1 equals 24, but some were more complicated, using both multiplication and division. 6 times 8 divided by 2 equals 24. 12 times 12 divided by 6. And so the more math that children know, we can take care of youngsters that are not such fast learners and the more advanced students. And so just one change in the question. And I talked to a mathematician about this, and he told me the more math you know, there are an infinite number of ways to make 24. One simple little question. Imagine. Now, they ran across a board game where each number is given a letter, and then here's the letter D, which is 10, and they put 10 in there, and then how much you have to add to it or change it to make a certain number. So there's lots of fun activities. Remember, enjoyment always leads the list of the 3 E's. Now, the next suggestion is also an important one. We want young people to learn the investigative process. How do people, my sort of off-the-cuff definition of type 3 is the young person thinking, feeling, and doing like the practicing professional, even if they're doing it at a more junior level than, say, a scientist from the university or a filmmaker from Hollywood. They're doing what the big guys do, only at a more junior level. So what we try to do is to teach them the investigative process. And one of the ways that we do this is we teach them how to use a series of instruments. And this is actually a picture of part of my lab. We have an eye chart, we have a pH meter, we have a salt analyzer. And think of this again as type 2 enrichment. So I'm going to give you just there's a small book on this. I'm not trying to sell books, but there's a book with all of these instruments are described. One of each of the instruments in the boxes is described, and then some activities for children to learn how to use the instruments. And here's the list of instruments that we use. Now, here's just an example of a bacteria test meter. And what you do is you get the children all to wash their hands in the same amount of water and the same temperature of water and the same 3 dabs of soap on their hands. So all children's hands are now standardized clean. Then they take this instrument and they can use it to measure how much bacteria is on their hands. So here they went out on the playground and they touched things that are commonly touched. And then they use the meter to determine how much bacteria is on their hands from this little handle, from the railing on the playscape, and also from the swing seat. So now, just to summarize all of this, we have again the things that we already talked about. Here is my website for this, and you go to the Schoolwide Enrichment selection there. Here again, the major goals of the models, the 3 E's. What makes for an outstanding SEM program? First of all, total faculty involvement. We want to get all of the faculty to do some of these kinds of exciting things. And for this, we have knowledge about the model. And again, I do have 6 very short videotapes on the major aspects of the model that I'm sending to Hala, and you can use those to train teachers. The second is ownership. I don't ever want to see 2 exact copies of a school-wide enrichment program. I want you to build it because of your own resources, your own interests as teachers, as educators. It's very important that you have some ownership. The third thing is what we call, this is the second thing, common goals, unique means. Build it your way as long as you reach the 3 E's. The next one is work smarter, not harder. Again, the use of technology makes this so much easier. The second is teacher and administrator trust. Unfortunately, I've been in some schools where the principal will say, oh, our goal here is to raise our test scores. We don't have time for all that enrichment stuff. And so I think that I will not do a workshop in a school unless the principal comes and stays for the workshop so that she or he understands what we're trying to do. Very important. Then the next one is celebration of excellence. You saw, for example, the Night of the Notables. We want parents to know that their children are learning more than just states and capitals and times tables. They're doing something that's of special interest. And so, again, the whole idea is joyful school culture, a radiation of excellence throughout the entire school. I also want to mention that I do have a LinkedIn website where I usually put new material or frequently cited articles. And if you want to join my LinkedIn website, just go to this and put that in. And when I do something new or when I have an article that's received a lot of popularity, I put it on there. And again, they're all downloadable, translatable, no cost, no permission required. So I'm going to stop at this point. And Hala, do we want to have some questions? Do we have time for some questions?
I think we do have a few minutes for Q&A. Professor Renzulli, thank you so much for that very enlightening talk. We do have quite a number of questions posted right now in the chat box, but I'll probably just select quite a few. I'd like to acknowledge Dr. Ferial Tucker, the Senior Specialist from the Ministry of Education. Let me begin with some of the questions that he asked, because the questions he asked actually pertain to the theme of the Cross-Cultural Collaboration Symposium. His questions have to do with the impact of, COVID-19, the pandemic, for gifted and talented students, and how do the enrichment models support gifted children to cope with the pandemic, if at all?
Well, that's a very good question. Unfortunately, an awful lot of what teachers have been doing during the pandemic is what I call worksheets online. But I did have a teacher who actually developed a program of having her enrichment clusters online, and it worked very well. I do think that young people can do type 3s on their own as long as they have ways of getting feedback from their teachers. Obviously, it's a little bit different, but the pandemic has changed learning in a lot of places. Now, there's some good news here, though. I think that for the first time, I have seen teachers who are a little resistant to using technology being forced to use technology, and their technology skills have grown dramatically. Also, again, young people are so much more advanced than some of their teachers in using technology that they take to this online learning a lot easier. But I do believe that even after the pandemic is over, we're going to find teachers doing more of what they sometimes call in America the flipped classroom. That is, they do all of their reading at home so that when they come to school, there's more discussion, there's more application of what they've studied. And so I think we'll also see more of that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Renzulli. Another thing that struck most of the participants, and I can see that in the chat box, is what you mentioned about building the curriculum around the student, which is, I think, very, very important. And we all believe to be very important. What are your observations or your thoughts on how difficult this may have been, this aspect of building the curriculum around the student for teachers of the gifted students during the pandemic? I mean, how has the role of the teacher shifted as they become like guide on the side during the pandemic?
Yeah, well, this is a very, very good question. I think that when we've had an opportunity to provide teachers with the kind of training that goes along with using the school-wide enrichment model, that we've seen remarkable interest. My partner, Dr. Sally Reese, has just recently done an article, it's on our website, on the research, a summary of the research on the school-wide enrichment model. And we found nothing but positive responses, especially in much more interest and engagement on the parts of students. And so the research on this has been very, very pleasing. And I do think that the kinds of things that cause young people to get interested and turned on to a topic are the things that result in much more depth and complexity of their learning than just, again, another assigned topic where mainly what they're doing is memorizing material.
Perfect. Maybe just a final question. Dr. Hala typed in a question that she has here. Are type 3 projects expected to be related to the curriculum? So that will be our final question.
I say again, expected to be?
Related to the curriculum. Are they expected to be aligned?
Well, yes, you can, for example, relate them to a specific curricular area. Just to go back again to the one about the Victorian architecture study, that was part of a history course. And I think that there's not any topic in any course in the world that can't be enhanced by finding out the ways children might like to conduct a creative, investigative topic within science, within history, within creative writing, within music, within art. Within mathematics. You saw the example there with the multiplication table. And so I think that getting teachers together, as I did, I'll go back to the example from Florida, getting them together and saying, here's a topic in history, in our country, social studies, where you learn the names of the states and the capitals. Simple question. How can you make this more interesting for children? I mentioned one group of children came up with a rap song for the state of Florida. Once a month, these children go to assembly and they have to sing the state song, and they don't like it very much. It's a very largely Hispanic populated school district. And so they came up with a great rap song. They even sent me you know, a little audio of it. And if we want to create the creative producers of the future, the people that will go out and write the books and create the inventions and start the businesses, the only way to train them to do that is to give them opportunities, what I call the concept of ORE, O-R-E, opportunities, resources, and encouragement. And that's the way people in the non-school world get their work done.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Renzulli. I think what stood out to all of us would be the videos that you have also shared earlier with the children and how much joy they derive from the experience of being part of the school-wide enrichment model, because at the end of the day, that's what we do. That's why we do what we do. And it's really very inspiring. And I think I will echo everyone's comments in the chat box. And we would like to thank you so much for your time, for your being here with us. Professor Hala, is there any last words that you would like to say?
I guess I would like just to say thank you. Thank you, Professor Renzulli, for an enlightening and interesting presentation. And really, I would like to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being flexible and accommodate also our schedule. Thank you very much for sharing with us your knowledge, experience, and work, which is really, inspired all of us. Thank you very much. And we are looking forward to our next interaction soon. And I wish you the best. Thank you.
Send me an email, Hala, and I'll get that material and I'll copy you on it as well.
I will definitely will. Thank you very much, Professor Renzulli, and thank you very much for all our guests.
My great honor and my great pleasure to be with you. Bless you all.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.